As you can see from the vacant tool wall behind me, I am currently moving studios. So today I'm going to share with you a project I completed earlier in the year with a friend of mine at my previous studio, where we make a knife out of used guitar strings. The result of making this knife actually ended up being a lot more charitable than we expected. We raised £10,000 on the dot for this project, and it's gone to funding studio space for a maker in London for a year. Here's the full video, start to finish, of us building a Damascus steel knife from used guitar strings. Today I ventured out of my workshop to see Holly Loftus, award-winning knife maker based in London. Today though, we both come to the headquarters of Holly's old employers, Blenheim Forge, who have kindly lent us the space in which to execute a cunning plan. Holly and I met after being placed on the same corridor of our workshop building in South London. When she saw a video of me changing my guitar strings, Holly realised that the metal they were made out of might be the very same that she uses in her own work. And so we wondered, could we successfully make a knife out of guitar strings? This is a video in which we will try just that. She's going to take care of the amazing steel work, I'm going to take care of the handle. It's a collaboration we've been wanting to do for such a long time, and today is the day in which we're going to start. Now, if you're a regular watcher of my channel, I assume that you're familiar with Diodario guitar strings. And man, did they come through for us on this project. All these guitar strings are either used or didn't quite pass the rigorous quality check that the factory instates. First thing was to chop up all the strings into short lengths, which we initially started doing by hand until James from Blenheim Forge advised us that we were not perhaps making full use of the machinery at our fingertips. When enough strings were cut, Holly set about putting them into the vessel that we're going to use to make the billet of steel. They'll be joined by a specialist steel powder that Holly will then heat to create our piece of guitar string Damascus steel. But first, Holly had to draft in the help of a rather unexpected ally.
The Tipex has titanium dioxide in it, which stops the steel and strings we're putting into it sticking to the container.
Holly is really making sure that she leaves no gaps between the steel powder and the strings, which is easier said than done.
The powder is very fine and the strings are very fiddly. It's hard. So we've popped a little piece of steel into the top of this, and now I'm going to weld around the seam so that the canister is closed. Does that make sense?
Yeah. When she'd finished welding, Holly casually dropped that if you don't drill a hole into the steel you're using before you use the hydraulic press on it, it might explode. So it was some nerves my end that we went into the other room where they actually had loads of wonderful and weird machinery and fired up the forge ready to heat the billet. This contraption is actually called a thermocouple. Now the reason I know this is because I actually use it in my work when I'm bending guitar sides. Holly's has a pretty cool remote control though, which I don't have, but I want it. When I'm bending wood, I'm generally in the ballpark between 90 and 120 degrees. Holly is taking this forge to over 1200 degrees. 1200 is not quite enough for the strings to melt, but rather enough that when pressure is applied, the materials inside can be fused. Melting would actually be the worst case scenario because we do want to see that beautiful guitar string pattern on the steel when it's done. And since we're using nickel strings, we should see the strings show up as a bright colour set against the darker colour of the high carbon steel powder. Holly actually beautifully pointed out that just as the strings have a lovely bright sound, so they will have a nice bright aesthetic. Here, Holly is applying 20 tons of pressure with the press, equivalent to 3 adult elephants sitting on our canister.
We can't see what's going on inside the canister, but we're hoping that the heat of the forge and the pressure of this squishing it is going to weld everything together inside. We won't know until the end.
Holly tells me that we need a 50% reduction to ensure there's no air bubbles or inclusions in our billet. Repetition is key. This is where the titanium dioxide comes in handy from our Tipex. We don't want the steel canister to merge with anything inside it, and if Holly can make that 50% reduction, we should have our usable guitar string Damascus, so we can take it to the next stage, as Holly is about to explain.
But it's looking good. When we're squishing it now, you can see that the canister is kind of coming away from the contents of the canister. So
Right now the knife is in our canister still, so you can't see the beautiful markings that I hope will be there with the guitar strings on. It's just so tantalizing seeing it encased. So here we are. From all the processes that she'd just done, Holly was hoping that the steel strings and the steel powder would be fused together enough now to remove the canister from around it. And as is the case sometimes in craft, an angle grinder and a bit of force was the only way for it.
it looks good. The canister's coming away. Tipex obviously worked. It's hard to hammer it when the vise is wriggling so much. Oh.
Okay, yeah, that's done.
Yeah? Get out of the way.
Whoa!
Scientific.
Yay!
Soon to be a knife.
Like a baby.
Like a tiny baby.
Cool. Now it was time for the thicknessing stage, at which point I was drafted in.
Just hold it like that and then the piece will come through and then you just grab it. Like, can I fuck it up in any way? Not really. Your shoes flat. Yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe not.
Holly is hitting the steel to gradually ease it into being flat and compact. And lastly, it's into the pit of vermiculite, which aids the cooling process. And then it's back to the other workshop again, where Holly jumps on the belt sander just to tidy that steel off a bit. She'll also need to chop the steel in half in preparation for sanmai, or lamination.
We've made the steel that we want to use on the outside of the blade steel. So we're using like a really good steel for the knife cutting edge. And then we're putting our guitar string Damascus on the outside. So we've got that set up. I'm going to weld the guitar string Damascus on the outside of a spicy white steel core.
Spicy white.
I don't know who named it. I didn't name it.
Holly's spicy white steel that she's using for the core of the blade will ensure that the blade is strong enough to hold a really sharp edge, while laminated on either side will be our beautiful guitar string Damascus. This really was a moment of truth as our final billet was finally being created. All she needed to do was one more thickness after the steels had been welded together. If that worked, it was time to take a sigh of relief and down tools for the day. If not, our project has failed. Day 2 in the lamination stage had worked like a dream, so we were back at another branch of Blenheim Forge, this time in Peckham in London. Today it was time for blade shaping and heat treatment, a day that I was really excited about because we'd start to see the steel become an actual knife.
I'm scribing the template of our knife onto the blade that we forged, and then we're just going to clean it up.
Using James's trusty steel guillotine, Holly trimmed the steel to the template that she'd scribed on. Much like woodwork, Holly is working through the grits of the sandpaper on her belt, doing the final shaping of the template.
Okay, so we've taken a piece of our guitar string Damascus, we've forged it out into a blade, we've cleaned up the shape, so this is pretty much the final shape of our blade now. And now we need to do the heat treatment, which is a multi-stage process. We're going to heat up the steel to 800 degrees, cool it down really quickly, and that's going to give us a usable knife steel. And that's it.
Holly heats a barrel of oil to about 70 degrees, which is going to be our cooling off fluid. By plunging the 800 degree blade into the cooler oil, she will change the grain structure of the steel, hardening it and making it capable of retaining its sharp edge. This can also make it pretty brittle, so if we did drop it at this stage, God forbid, it would shatter like glass. No pressure, Holly. To reduce its brittleness, the blade is finally tempered in an oven at 200 degrees for 2 hours. This again changes the structure of the steel, producing a good balance between hardness, toughness, and corrosion resistance for the finished knife blade. So back in her workshop, Holly was wetting her pants a bit, because today was the day that if it had succeeded, we'd expect to see the guitar strings when we sanded into the metal. Obviously I was pretty confident, but I can understand how stressful it would be if you haven't made this kind of steel before and you're worried about whether it's going to work or not. Nerves still intact though. We began to see glimpses of strings underneath all the metal work.
I'm boiling. So I'm just using this to clean up the bevels of the knife and flatten them. The more we polish it, the better you'll be able to see our strings in the finished piece.
As a coffee lover, safe to say this next bit completely ruined my life. You have been warned.
So this coffee, we've put in like this instant coffee. It's the cheapest, strongest stuff I can get, and the coffee has an acid in it that actually etches the blade. So if we leave it in for about 5 hours, the coffee is going to turn the 1095 steel that we have in the blade really dark, and the nickel strings will stay really bright.
That means that the coffee is so acidic it can literally etch the blade.
But you get 62 cups out of it, so
that's how much you put in.
yeah, but I think it's a bit excessive, but may as well, you know, it's our special knife.
I didn't really have any words for this bit. It was just so beautiful to see the bright silver nickel strings really pop on this blade. There was a real moment of testimony to Holly's craftswomanship, that she actually made this happen from a bunch of old guitar strings. Alright guys, I've done absolutely nothing to be helpful up to this point, so now is my time to shine. Admittedly, the knife steel itself is the biggest nod to guitar making, but I definitely wanted to continue that theme into the handle. And the obvious solution is to use a tone wood. Now if you don't know what tone wood is by now, here's the rundown. We as humans have always found ways to use wood according to the characteristics of each genus of timber. From making yew bow and arrows for its supple yet stiff properties, to using teak for boat building according to its tough yet rot resistant qualities. The same is true for musical instruments. There are definitely better types of wood for that. These species of wood range from rosewoods to mahogany to more unusual stuff like African padauk or fossilized black oak, all offering a wide palette of tonal options as part of their genetic grace. So anyway, as I'm making this guitar at the moment from a wood called koa, I thought it appropriate I use that. It's from Hawaii, which is obviously cool. Plus, it's nice for me to be working on a guitar and a knife handle in the same timber at the same time. It's an appropriate guitar-y nod to the time in which this knife was created. I also want to incorporate a nod to the binding scheme in my instruments with a black and white laminated framing line around the centre of the handle. Because the steel is so striking on its own, I really wanted to make sure I didn't go crazy on the handle, just keep it nice and simple, because that's always the best policy. What I just clamped up was my centerpiece, aka my ebony and maple veneers, and after a nice clean up, I cut the slot on the bandsaw that would accept the handle of the knife. Now you might notice these sort of ridges that Holly has cut into the steel. That is because we'll be using marine grade epoxy resin. Epoxy is extremely strong, and it works best when it has a little bridge that it can create of itself to join two surfaces together. However, for gluing the wood together, for all you nerds, I'm using polyurethane. I'm gonna keep talking because the audio of this video clip is me listening to really embarrassing music, so yes, hello. Oh look, the glue's dry, perfect. At this point it was just time for another cleanup and make sure everything was glued together beautifully. Next we go to this very exciting tool that I was introduced to very recently by Holly. It's called a brooch, but I prefer the name the Christmas Tree of Danger. Because look at it. That slot that I made earlier, which was going to accept the blade handle, that can get a bit clogged up with glue. So this tool is literally just to remove any excess glue and make sure it's deep enough to accept the handle. Next, it's on to the shaping process. We're going to have a steel connector at the top between the blade and the handle. This reminded me of carving a guitar neck. You want to make sure it's pleasant to hold, and you want to make sure there are no rough spots or bumps. A few checks later, I was pretty much ready to final sand. I took it up to 240 grit and brought it straight back to Holly to have the steel connector glued on.
Yeah, cool.
There are builders outside while we're filming this. Couldn't for the life of me work out what they were saying, which obviously made it way funnier.
So I'm just feeling for the burr. We're being so careful because we're so nervous. I reckon it's sharp. Getting it super glam. What do you reckon?
Thanks so much for watching, guys. Again, it was such a lovely project to be a part of. Holly is an absolute boss. Go follow her on all of the social medias. She doesn't have a YouTube, but I'll try and convince her to. If you want to read up about where the money went, then please feel free to visit the links in the bio. I'll pop them in there, and I'll see you real soon.